So let's talk about the sprint retrospective. This is the opportunity for the Scrum team to get together to inspect and adapt their process, their way of working, and how to improve that. Just as important as the sprint review, where we inspect and adapt our product, it's important the Scrum team takes time to inspect and adapt how to improve the way they work. So, who has to be at the sprint retrospective? Well, you're not going to be surprised by now to hear that it's the Scrum team, right? It's the opportunity for all of us to get together and figure out what problems do we have and how can we improve. What's the time box for the sprint retrospective? According to the Scrum Guide, 3 hours for a 1-month sprint, or shorter for shorter sprints. Now here, I don't think 45 minutes is enough to do a retrospective. I would recommend that a Scrum team get together for at least an hour and a half to have time to go deep into issues and figure out how to improve. So let's talk about the inputs for this event. What does the Scrum team need to prepare before they go to the retrospective so that they're ready to have good discussions and identify good improvement actions? Well, the first thing is going to be people should reflect a little bit about how the sprint went and bring to the retrospective those thoughts, those feelings, things that made them happy, things that pissed them off, things that confused them. So take a little bit of time before the retrospective to think back on the sprint and see how did it go? What could have gone better? Another thing the Scrum team should prepare before the retrospective is some data. How did the sprint go? Did we deliver stuff? Did we have a lot of unplanned work come in? Did a lot of people miss work for some other reasons? They get pulled off for another project? Whatever data could matter for the team to figure out about how they're working together and whether it could be more effective there. And typically here, the Scrum Master, before the retrospective, should be spending some time to think about also how the sprint went, but more importantly, what am I going to be doing during the retrospective? The Scrum Master needs to prepare the retrospective based on what happened during the sprint to make sure that we're going to be doing exercises that are going to keep the developers and the product owner engaged. Now, let's talk about the agenda a little bit. So, regardless of the specific exercises that the Scrum Master decides to organize for the retrospective or whoever is facilitating the retrospective, there is a basic general agenda or structure for a retrospective. The first thing you're going to be doing is setting the stage, right? So the Scrum team is getting together to discuss how the sprint went. It's a good idea to give people a chance to check in or some kind of icebreaker, something to get people in the mood to reflect and define improvement actions. Now, you're not going to be spending a lot of time on this. So typically, as a rule of thumb, about less than 5% of the total time you have for your retrospective. The second step in the agenda is to gather data. So people brought in their individual feelings, their individual data, the Scrum Master prepared some data, maybe the team got together also to gather some other data. We need to put all this data out so we can look at what's going on or what happened this sprint. After we do that, we can spend a little bit of time grouping items, identifying common problems, common improvement areas that we see. prioritize them, because you don't want to spend the retrospective trying to improve everything. That would be a mistake. Focus on one or two things. We prioritize those issues. We find some kind of mechanism to decide which one we're working on, which brings us to the third step in the agenda, to generate some insights. That's where you're going to go deeper into the problems you identified, or the problem you identified, to try to understand root causes, what's happening there, what needs to change for us to have a positive impact here. Once we're clear on that, then we can define some actions, and that would be the next step in the agenda. What are we concretely going to do or change in the next sprint to try to improve this problem? Once we have clarity on those actions, we're ready to move to the fifth step on the agenda, which is to close the retrospective, where you're going to be spending a little bit of time maybe getting some feedback on how the retrospective went, or some other closing exercise. And again, here you're not going to be spending a significant amount of time typically, so as a rule of thumb, less than 5% of your total retrospective time. So that's a basic agenda for a sprint retrospective. So let's talk a little bit about the outputs. Once we run through that agenda, what do we generate? What comes out of the sprint retrospective? Well, the first clear thing that comes out are improvement actions. So the question is, where are we going to put these improvement actions? Remember, something that's an action requires time from people. That means somebody in the Scrum team is going to have to spend some time on this improvement action. So where should the improvement action go? Correct, the product backlog. That's where the Scrum team puts all the work that's going to take some time from them. So improvement actions find their way into the product backlog and are prioritized by the product owner. Normally, the product owner should be prioritizing at least one improvement action for every sprint. That's the point of continuous improvement. Another possible output of the retrospective is a decision. A decision is different than an action because it doesn't require time. We just decide something. For example, if a Scrum team decides to change the time of their daily Scrum, a decision they're fully capable to do, it doesn't impact anybody else, they just decide that in the retrospective and it's done. That decision is usually going to find its home in one of three places. Either the definition of done, the definition of ready, or the working agreements of the team. For example, when you change the time of the daily Scrum, you would simply update your working agreement to say the daily Scrum is now 9:45 instead of 9:30. So what are some typical challenges you might face in the retrospective? Well, a couple of things I hear frequently. One is a lack of trust, right? If you don't have trust within your Scrum team, people don't feel comfortable to bring up issues in the retrospective. And if they don't bring up issues, then you can't improve on those issues. This is absolutely a problem. Typically, the Scrum Master is busy working with the team to try to create an environment of trust. That's where we're working on principles, values, exercises to build that trust within the team. It's important you have that, or else you're not going to be able to have honest and good sprint retrospectives. Another dysfunctionality people usually mention is the product owner not being present in the retrospective. And in most cases, when I hear about that, it's about the developers wouldn't feel comfortable discussing issues in front of the product owner. Again, you see the issue of trust. There's full trust in a Scrum team. A Scrum team needs to have trust to be able to collaborate effectively. The last dysfunctionality to mention about the sprint retrospective is the fact that some Scrum teams don't do it. I hear this quite frequently, much more frequently than I would like. When I ask teams about their retrospectives, I hear something like, oh no, we're too late with the delivery right now, so we skipped the retrospective. That's a mistake, right? Maybe the reason you're late with your delivery is because you're not taking time to improve. Have the discipline to make time every sprint to discuss how can we improve. That's it. So this is a short overview of the sprint retrospective and some tips on how to get started running one.